All right, welcome back for the latest installment here. And today we're going to be talking about something that I have seen a lot, both in person and just reading the news so far this year. And that is the fact that a lot of people are nowadays struggling with anxiety, emptiness, depression, one or all three of those things. And so I thought it might be good to take a look at that from a biblical point of view and touch on a few things that I've noticed and see if we can make sense of why this is and if there is any remedy for what seems to be plaguing a lot of people these days. So, um, it is interesting when we talk about this subject that first and foremost, if you're listening to this video, chances are you probably live in a nation that has a very high standard of living. And it seems that these issues are plaguing people that live in relatively wealthy, affluent, industrialized nations. And so it seems like even though we should maybe be one of the happiest generations and cultures, wherever you might be, it seems that it's the exact opposite, that we tend to be the most depressed, anxious, empty generation, even though we should be the most comfortable and most happy given our relative economic status compared to previous generations. And so it's interesting to take a look at that. I think one of the reasons a lot of people struggle with this so much is just the fact that we find ourselves in a generation that has, at least in the Western world, swung in a very hard direction towards secular humanism. And so when you go from maybe a theological point of view to a secular humanistic point of view, what I've tend to notice with people that I know that would follow that line of thinking is that they do struggle a lot with anxiety, emptiness, and depression. And, you know, when you follow secular humanism, essentially it boils down to if you follow it to its logical conclusion, there really is no point to life. It's all kind of meaningless. And once it finishes, you end up in a box. So if you're going to spend your days and try to attach some type of meaning to your days, really you get to the point where you come to the conclusion that it's just about materialism and pleasure and filling your life with as much of that as you can. And so when you do that, a lot of younger people, guys, end up getting addicted to things like pornography, video games. Uh, Once again, whatever form of materialism and pleasure you enjoy, you fill that up, fill that cup as much as you can. And ladies, they tend to follow more along the lines of body image issues and social media consumption. And so when you're getting addicted to things like these and just filling your days with materialism and pleasure, it's no wonder that we end up feeling miserable at the end of all that. These feelings of anxiety, emptiness, depression are sort of like the check engine light on your car. It's your soul telling you, hey, we're doing things that aren't right, that aren't good for our soul, and your conscience and your soul starts to cry out, and depression, anxiety, emptiness are what you end up getting at the end of all that. So that's the bad news. The good news is it doesn't have to be like that. Um, there are solutions, there are answers, and as usual, we find them in the Bible. Now you are going to get other options out there in the secular world. It's going to be psychology for some people, going to see the psychologist, and usually that psychologist is going to tell you a few things. Is going to tell you your problems are either because of something that happened to you as a child or because of some relationship that you have. And then they're usually going to write you a prescription for antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. But of course, those cannot solve the issue. You may feel better temporarily, but they're not going to solve the issue because they don't address the issue. And the issues are more biblical in nature. And so, on the one hand, you've got, once again, secular humanism that tells you life is all about you, and do what you can to get as much meaning out of your days, whether that's yoga, meditation, following some sort of line of New Age religion, or if you want to go the hedonistic route and go with materialism and pleasure, that essentially these are the things you're going to do to try and fill your days with some type of meaning. But at the end, they won't satisfy because they can't satisfy, because these are not the things that you were created or intended for. And so sometimes people, once they've chased those avenues down for as long as they can, will turn to a more biblical point of view, especially if they've grown up with a Judeo-Christian background. And so we'll take a look at what the Bible says here for essentially what the meaning of life is, what your purpose here is. And so from a biblical worldview, it's going to be essentially four things. Number one is you're created for God's pleasure. Number two, and we'll take a look at a couple verses of these things after we go through the initial list. Number two, you're made to glorify God. Number three, you're made to have a relationship with God. And number four, you're meant to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. Those are the four things that the Bible says that we are created for. Now, quite often, a lot of people are not going to like those four things because we tend, as I said, to think that this life is all about us. If you follow media, popular media, and pop culture, television, music, movies, news, it creates a worldview that this life is all about us. And the good and the bad news is that that's not true. I say bad news because we tend to like life being all about us, and as such, we want to make everything about ourselves. That's what if you watch sports, you see that, right? Everybody's pointing themselves out. In the old days, maybe sports was about teamwork and about good sportsmanship, and today it's nothing but a 3-hour exercise of me, 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 whatever your favorite sport is. You've seen that bear out. And so the bad news is life is not all about us. But the good news is also life is not all about us, because after you have tried to live out life being all about you for a certain amount of time, you just end up feeling miserable anyways. So life not being all about you is sort of a weight off your shoulders in the end, right? Because there's only going to be so many celebrities, so many Instagram social influencers, so many captains of industry, so many high-level politicians. There's only so many of those positions to go around, and when you don't live up to that level of expectation, you're probably going to find some level of disappointment. And once you find out that actually life is not about you, but it's about God, it can be actually very freeing and, like I said, a weight off your shoulders. So let's go back to number one here. We're created for God's pleasure, and we find that we'll back all of this up with Scripture in Revelation 4:11 here. So that's right here. And it says, "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created." So it's very clear there. We are created for God and His pleasure. We're not created for, we didn't create God for our pleasure. And this creation was not created for our pleasure, but rather it's created for God and His pleasure. And number two, we're created to glorify God. And that was also in this verse here, Revelation 4:11. It says, "Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. And then another verse on that line of thinking is Isaiah 43:7. It says, everyone that is called by my name, for I have created him for my glory. So we're created for God's glory, not for our own glory. I have formed him, yea, I have made him. So God has created man, and he has made him for his glory. And, how many times have we seen your favorite celebrity, your favorite athlete, your favorite maybe social media person? Um, they seem like they're doing well for a while, and then they're on top of the world. And then lo and behold, a few years later, you find out they say in an interview or something like this that they were actually miserable and ended up crashing and burning, whether through drugs and alcohol or some type of other addiction, and they kind of crash and burn. So we've seen in recent years people like Britney Spears, Kanye West, Justin Bieber, all these type of people who seem to have all of the worldly success that many of us are seeking to attain, and then they end up getting all of that and saying that they felt miserable when they reached the end of that road and found that it was just empty and kind of meaningless. And so, of course, it's going to be that way when we're not created to glorify ourselves, but we're created to glorify God. The third reason we're created is to have a relationship with God. So quite often you'll see a T-shirt that's popular in Christianity that says it's not about religion, it's about relationship. And so this is sort of a main difference between Christianity and all other religions, right? All other religions, essentially, they are what's called works-based salvation, where you are working your way up to God. You're working your way to heaven, to salvation, either by doing good things or not doing bad things, or some combination thereof. Christianity is the only religion that says uh, it's not what you do, it's what he did, right? So in Christianity, it's 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 1 through 4, that Jesus died on the cross, paid the penalty for our sins, that he was crucified, buried, and rose again on the third day. And that if you believe that, you are saved to eternal life. And so that's what Christianity would say is the method to salvation. And so once again, having a relationship with God. And we find that in 1 John 3:1, where it says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, right? Children, relationship. Bible quite often refers to God as a father. And so that, once again, just emphasizes relationship between God and humanity. So we'll finish the verse, be called the children of God, and so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. And so it's really kind of reassuring and comforting, actually, if you think about it. Um, as I said, quite often throughout the Bible, God refers to his relationship with us as a father. Another verse mentions something similar to this is Matthew 23:37, where he's speaking to the nation of Israel and says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Right? So once again, the relationship being like a mother hen with her chickens, God being a mother or father to his children, those that are believing in God. And so the final thing here is, well, let's also continue with number 3 for a minute, the relationship with God. It's also interesting that quite often when we would follow other gods, idol worship or worshiping in other religions, God once again emphasizes relationship by referring to this practice in terms of adultery, right? So the first two of the Ten Commandments are about man's relationship with God. the rest of the commandments about man's relationship to man. And, the first two being the most important: you shall have no other gods before you, and you shall not make any idols, right? Any graven images. And um, so once again, we see the emphasis being on relationship between man and God. So then continuing to number 4, why are we created? We're also created to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so we find this all over. We won't read all of the verses on that, but it's all throughout, especially the New Testament. But it says here in Mark chapter 16, verse 15, and he said unto them, Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. So there's a whole slew of verses here. I won't go through all of them, but this kind of sums up the reason you're created. What is the purpose of life? Once again, just to reiterate, the Bible tells you it's essentially 4 things from the Old Testament to the New Testament. It's you're created for God's pleasure, you're created to glorify God, you're created to have a relationship with God, and you're created to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. And that's it. And, it is, once again, very freeing. When you make life all about yourself, it's very shallow, it's very empty, and it ends up just feeling meaningless anyways. Once again, the product, the outgrowth of a man-centered, me-centered worldview, uh, you're only going to reap anxiety, emptiness, and depression because that's not what you're created for. We are made to worship God, but when we don't do this, we will make an idol for ourselves in some form or fashion. And it's interesting, when we make that idol, quite often it is tied to our self-identity, right? So idol worship can be, what we think of very old school. So, creating an image that we worship in other religions. So worshiping a God outside of Christianity, outside of Judeo-Christian worldview would be one form of idol worship, but another form, and the form we tend to follow in the Western world, would be more along the lines of something more secular, more humanistic. So for some people, it's going to be their job will be their idol. For some people, it's going to be their bank account, right? How much money they're making. For some people, it's going to be their husband or their wife or their boyfriend or their girlfriend. For some people, it's going to be their children. You will put something up as an idol, and you will end up worshiping it, whether you realize it or not. And it's only going to lead to disappointment. It's only going to lead to anxiety, emptiness, depression, or all of the above, because anything you put up as an idol in place of Jesus, in place of your relationship with God, it's only going to let you down, because everything outside of God is fallible, right? Especially, your job. Something's going to happen with your job at some point. Your bank account, that's going to go up and down. Your relationship with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse, it's always going to lead to disappointment. None of those things are perfect, so they will disappoint you in the end. And that's why it can be dangerous to form these type of idols, because you're not created for these things, and they will only disappoint you. And that disappointment is going to lead you to some form of the things that I mentioned. So the good news is you don't have to worship those things. There is an alternative out there. It is found in a relationship with God. And, some practical things you can do once you have discovered this, to no longer have these feelings of anxiety, emptiness, and depression, are some things that I've found that worked in my life, and so I'll share those with you. So first is reading the Bible every day, even if it is just one chapter a day. One chapter will take you about 5 minutes, but I find that when I'm doing that every day, listening to Christian music, So that was sort of a work in progress. I didn't start doing that immediately. That was kind of a gradual process where I just noticed over time I started to gradually phase out worldly music, as we say in Christianese, and I gradually started to phase in more and more Christian music with Christian content, Christian themes, Christian values, and songs that talk more about your relationship with God. Now, that was not always easy because there was a lot of bad Christian music out there, stuff that just wasn't good, to be honest with you. It was just pretty corny, pretty cheesy, but now there are a lot of really radio quality options out there for Christian music. And so that's changed a lot in the last, 5, 6, 7, up to 10 years. But especially in the last 5 years or so, there's a lot of good quality, radio quality, good production value Christian music out there if you're looking for that. So that helps. So reading the Bible, listening to Christian music. Number 3, praying. Uh, there's a verse, what is it, Ephesians 6, I think it's from, about putting on the whole armor of God, and a big component of that is praying. So just praying every day. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to be Billy Graham or some sort of eloquent theologian. It's just very simple. It's having a conversation with God in the same way you would have a relationship with a parent or your spouse or brother or sister or what have you. It's just a simple conversation with God, and taking your cares and your worries and your troubles and your thoughts to God. And so that's a big component, prayer. And then fourth would be filling your mind and your thoughts with Christian content, right? So getting away from secular movies, television. We already discussed music. Taking a break from the news every once in a while. So for that, that would you know substi- substituting alternatives to what you previously watched. So for me, that'd be watching sermons, watching Christian programming, whether that's television or movies, um, and listening to Christian music once again. So these are some of the things that I've done in my own life, and what you will find is you'll find that weight has been lifted off of you. You'll notice it gradually over time. You won't have the same dark cloud. You won't have the same weight on your shoulders that you had before. It'll happen gradually, and you won't even realize it. And then one day you'll wake up and notice you just feel differently than you did before. So these are the things I would recommend. Um, uh, and it's interesting, as we mentioned, you have a lot of depression going on these days in the world. Even though we would tend to think that we should be the happiest generation, um, and it's for reasons that we already discussed. But I want to take a look at the rate of antidepressant usage, just to kind of back up what we're talking about here. And it's interesting that uh, this is a table that gives the antidepressant usage by country, the highest rates of antidepressant usage. And it's if you believed what the media told you, it's the exact opposite of what the media tells you. So first of all, anytime you run across an article that talks about the happiest countries on earth, they always talk about the Scandinavian countries, right, as being the happiest places on earth. And I have friends in several Scandinavian countries, and I can tell you that it's the exact opposite. These are actually the most depressed countries on Earth, and specifically, you find a very high rate of suicide and a very high rate of drug overdose in these countries. So, and then thirdly, you have a very high rate of antidepressant usage. So if you look at the 4 Scandinavian countries, they are in the top 15 of this list here of about top 30 countries in the world in terms of antidepressant usage. So you've got Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Norway, all within the top 15. And some people would say, oh, well, that's due to them having very low levels of sunlight for a long period of the year. And it's not exactly true. Yes, they do have long hours of darkness in the wintertime, but everybody takes vitamin D in these countries. So it shouldn't be because of that reason, number one. And it's not. That's not the reason. Because number two, if you look at some of the other countries ranked very highly on this list, these are countries that get a lot of sunlight throughout the year. So countries like Australia, Portugal, um, Spain, New Zealand, and so Israel, Greece. So you've got countries that have Chile, Turkey, Italy. You've got countries that have very high levels of sunlight, D3, what have you, throughout the year, and they're still very highly rated on this list. So that's not the reason. Like I said, I think a lot of the reason and the main reason is these countries have just, especially Scandinavian countries, once again, I know a lot of people in these countries, um, people have turned away from God. And when you turn away from God and you chase everything this world tells you to chase, and once again in the West, that's going to be materialism and pleasure, it's going to lead you to a place of darkness, anxiety, emptiness, and depression. And so I've also seen on lists like this that the United States is ranked very highly as well. I'm not sure why it's not on this list, but this is from the OECD, and I forget what the what that's what the OECD stands for again. Let's well, we can just go back here and take a look. OECD was um, let's see here. It is the let's see Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So an official organization. Um, so anyways, it just goes to show you that they've got another list here. Same thing we were looking at earlier. But you know, all rich countries, all Western industrialized nations, very high standard of living, most of them. Of course, you have some from Eastern Europe that doesn't have the same high level of standard of living, but most of the countries on this list have a very high standard of living. So it doesn't make sense that once again, if you follow the news and you followed a secular humanist worldview, it doesn't make sense why, when we're the most comfortable, technologically advanced, richest culture and generation in history, we should be the happiest, and that just doesn't bear out in these statistics, including other statistics on anxiety, emptiness, depression, not just antidepressant usage. And once again, maybe that, as I said, that's because we've removed God from every square of public life. You know, we've removed the Ten Commandments from the courthouses. We've removed the Ten Commandments, the Bible, prayer from schools. And is it any wonder that we're seeing what we're seeing in 2020 and what is bearing out in the news? So, you know, once again, the bad news is it's not all about us. If that's what would make you sad, the good news is also it's not all about us. And I promise you, you know, go ahead, try it your way, and when you find out that that doesn't work, try what I'm recommending. Read the Bible, uh, listen to Christian music, pray, watch sermons, Christian programming, Christian movies, Christian television. It's not going to be all great stuff. You know, you're going to have to search around, find the good stuff, but it's out there, and you will notice a difference. You will feel a weight lifted off you, and you will have. I'm not telling you your life's going to be perfect after that. It's not going to be perfect after that, but you will have a peace and a joy and a hope that you don't have otherwise. And so I just wanted to play for you. This is Paul Harvey, a former broadcaster, and his thoughts on some of the things that I just touched on from 1965. And isn't it interesting how prescient he was? So let's take a listen to what he had to say.
were the devil, if I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. And what'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. Paul Harvey. Good day.
So there it is. Well, anyways, I hope some of this helps somebody out there. It's, you know, if you don't know the problem, you don't know the cure.
Another text question.
If you don't know the problem, you're going to have a hard time finding the cure. And I'm not telling you to get rid of your antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication, but, you know, it helps to get back to God. And we're soul and spirit, and antidepressants can't help that. Typically, we're doing things that are bad for our soul and spirit, and that's why we feel bad. It's the check engine light on the soul. So anyways, thank you for joining us, and as always, if you'd like to support the show, you can go ahead and do so by hitting the like, share, subscribe, and notification button if you want to know when more videos are coming out. I'm trying to put this type of material out on a regular basis, and if you would like to help me out, I'm a content creator as well as Christian missionary outside of the United States. And so if you'd like to help either of these endeavors, you can do so by checking the description box under the video or going to the About section of the channel. So thanks again, and we will see you again next time.